good afternoon everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to come here today to hear me talk a little bit about the 1641 depositions. Just the same as Gareth said, can you all hear me down at the back? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, well I'm here to talk about the 1641 depositions really, and I'm very grateful to Bonnie for the invitation to come here. I think this is the first time potentially that somebody who was involved in the project has spoken about them actually in Belfast. So it's a great opportunity to talk a little bit about them here as well. So I want to introduce you today to what we did in the project, and then obviously to what the depositions are and the type of information that's available in them. And at the end I'll talk a little bit about how you might actually go about using the website, because it's quite an interesting tool for both family research and local history, as well as for finding out about more national events as well. But just to introduce you a little bit, this is the project website. I'll show it to you again at the end. It was designed in Dublin, it's run through Trinity College Dublin, and it's very, very simple to use. It has depositions for every county in Ireland, and again I'll demonstrate it at the end. But this website was developed out of a project that we began back in 2007 when a team of researchers from Trinity College in Dublin, the University of Aberdeen and the University of Cambridge all embarked together on a project to make this material, to conserve it, to digitise it, transcribe it and make it available online. The project was funded, and I always have to say this, by the Irish Research Council in Dublin, the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, and by the Library of Trinity College Dublin. And it was a very groundbreaking digital humanities project in Ireland when we began it in 2007. Nothing like this had actually been attempted before, and it was a very unusual project in that it was making quite a controversial source publicly available for the first time. It had been very inaccessible. The originals were held in Trinity, nobody really was granted access to them, and if you wanted to see the material up until recently, you had to look at them on a fairly poor microfilm edition. So now we have both images of the original source and the transcription available online. So it's the first time in about 350 years that the public can access them. They were launched in 2010 by the then President of Ireland, Mary McAleese, and by Dr. Ian Paisley, Lord Burnside, who came to Dublin to help to launch it. And since then we've had about 70,000 registered users on the website, and lots of other hits, and they're from people all over the world. There are days that you're on it and you can actually see that somebody in India is sitting looking at them at the same time. So we can see people from everywhere. And quite a lot of the people obviously accessing them are academic researchers, but people interested are interested mainly in their own family and local history, and we get a lot of emails with regard to that. And the vast majority of those obviously are those descendants of the mainly English and Scottish settlers who came to Ireland during the plantations in the late 16th and into the early 17th century. So it's a very useful tool to understand a little bit more about Ulster's heritage. So the purpose, as I said today, is to really introduce this material to you and to let you know a little bit about them. The depositions and the 1641 rebellion obviously began on the 22nd of October 1641 when authorities foiled even a plot to seize Dublin Castle, when Owen Connolly revealed the scheme to Sir William Parsons, who was one of the Chief Justices of Ireland. Basically the guys came to Dublin to take part in the plot. We believe they ended up in a pub. Owen Connolly, possibly a little bit intoxicated, decided he was going to spill what exactly was intended the next morning. So that night they were captured obviously and arrested, and they later went on trial. But in the rest of Ireland, and particularly here in Ulster, on the very same night rebels began to rise and to seize key locations around the province. And those locations primarily consisted of plantation towns and villages and a lot of the fortified settlements. So the arch rebel, as he's known throughout the deposition, Sir Phelim O'Neill, who was from a little place in current-day County Tyrone known as Caledon. It wasn't Caledon then, but it is today. He captured Charlemont, and that sort of marked the beginning of a lot of takeovers. And we had other of the kind of what would have been the Gaelic Irish families, like the O'Quinns and the O'Hannons, seizing places like Mountjoy and Tandragee, and others seizing other locations, including Monaghan and Newry and many of the other towns of Ulster. So what began really as a relatively structured attempt to, by mainly Catholic rebels, to gain control of the country, gained quite a bit of momentum, and it moved into a very nationwide rebellion, where many Gaelic Irish rose in rebellion, quite often against their neighbours, the English settlers who they'd lived beside potentially for 80 years. And the rebellion spread into Leinster and into Connacht very, very quickly after it erupted in Ulster, with some of the earliest depositions from counties such as Meath showing that it had reached Meath within about 2 or 3 days, and eventually finding its ways into the depths of County Kerry, so all over the country. At the same time, while the country was erupting into this kind of widespread rebellion, the government still retained control of a number of key towns and fortifications, and they were principally places along the coast. So places like Dublin, Drogheda, Carrickfergus, Londonderry, Cork City, Youghal and Kinsale. But as the rebellion spread, as you can imagine, Ireland was very disrupted, and more displaced Protestant settlers began to flee from their homes, quite often from here in Ulster, to areas where they would have been more secure, and an awful lot of them would have fled to Dublin at that point in time. And from Ulster, obviously, many settlers fled directly down to Dublin, while others within coastal areas appear to have probably hopped the nearest boat and fled back to Scotland or England. As the reports of the devastation spread throughout Ireland, the Lords Justices of Ireland established a commission to try to find out more about the events, and they established the commission, which comprised of 7 clergymen, to go, as Aidan Clark recently noted, to collect information about certain aspects of the rebellion. And that information was collected in a series of examinations or depositions as they became known, and they were basically first-hand accounts by the settlers about what had actually happened to them. The initial commission was known as the Commission for the Despoiled Protestant, and they were asked, or the Despoiled Subject, sorry, it's sometimes known that people often call it the Commission for the Despoiled Protestant or the Despoiled Subject, and they were asked specifically what robberies and spoils have been committed upon them since the 22nd of October last, or shall hereafter be committed on them, what their names are, or where they now or last dwelt that committed those robberies, on what day or night the robberies or spoils were committed, what basically actions were done, any traitorous or disloyal words that were spoken, and that was quite a common theme, and then even further information about other circumstances of what had happened to them. Later on, that commission was increased to find out a little bit more about murders and a little bit more about people who had been forced to turn to the Mass, as they call it, or to convert to the Catholic religion to save their lives. So it's quite an interesting collection of material. The body of evidence that was collected is now collectively known by us as the 1641 depositions. And the intention of those depositions were initially to provide compensation for losses to the settlers, and also, more importantly, to prosecute any rebels who were implicated for crimes within them. The depositions collection as it is today essentially comprises a body of witness testimonies of Scottish and English Protestants concerning their experiences during the rebellion. But there are also other materials in there that relate to sort of later criminal trials against the Catholic rebels, and there are also depositions where we can see some of the kind of Catholic evidence a little bit with it as well, but they are primarily from the Scottish and English Protestant source. The testimonies, if you read them, are very, very structured. They normally start with the name and address of the settler or the individual giving that testimony, and that's where you can quite often very successfully locate family if you're interested in family research. But they go on to document the losses that they experienced, so everything that was robbed from them, so it could have been everything from corn to cows, and any military activity that took place, and then also the alleged crimes of the rebels. And they include a range of things from just assault to imprisonment to the stripping of clothes, right down to murder. So there's quite a large amount of material here. And you can imagine that given the nature of the evidence, they can sometimes be quite tough to read. But this body of material is quite unparalleled in early modern Europe. There's not a kind of comparative source for any of the other kind of early modern wars, so it's quite an interesting source from the perspective of looking at the social, economic and cultural history of Ireland. But this source, again, is very controversial, as I've said, primarily because it constituted for a very long time the chief evidence for a contested allegation that the rebellion began with a general massacre of Protestant settlers. And this is something that, by making them available online, people can make their own judgments about. But the depositions collection now, as it stands, is in Trinity College, Dublin. It was given to Trinity in 1741 to mark the 100th anniversary of the rebellion. But as I said, yeah, due to their fragility, they've been very poorly investigated. Most of the work to date in the academic world has been done by Aidan Clark on the depositions, and Aidan is still publishing on them. And more recent work has been done in terms of what they can tell us about the social history of Ireland in the period by historians such as Nicholas Canny. So there's a wide range of material, and people are working on them every day. We're seeing more and more studies of them taking place all around the world, right down to universities across America, for example, where students are now undertaking MA theses on them. So it's quite interesting. But to give you a little bit of an idea of what they consist of, they were given obviously by settlers from all over the country, but there is disparity in terms of the geographical spread of the depositions. The whole collection comprises about 41 volumes, and that includes 2 volumes for Connacht, 8 volumes for Ulster, 11 volumes for Leinster and 10 volumes for Munster. And 7 of those Munster volumes alone relate to County Cork. Now, that's quite an interesting geographical disparity in the sense that most of the work that has been completed to date on the depositions actually comes or relates to Ulster. Yet Ulster is probably almost the smallest collection of material there. And even within that kind of range, we have a disparity across all the volumes. So most of the really hardcore research, as I say, has been done in Ulster, yet as you can see, counties like Derry, Donegal and Tyrone are all together in one volume and are only 156 folios long. Armagh, for example, where a lot of detailed work has been done, is 269 folios, whereas County Cavan has 2 volumes to itself. Dublin again, 2 volumes, Cork with 7 volumes, and so on. And I'm going to explain a little bit about why that actually is the case. The depositions collection itself gives rise to a plethora of material, and this is why we see this wider geographical spread. Some of them that kind of can be very much deciphered by an understanding of the various categories. And the categories of depositions were first sort of put together by Aidan Clark in a very seminal article, which is available to download on the 1641 website, and the article is just titled The 1641 Depositions.